Hello, welcome to the Skeptrack. Thank you so much for joining us at DragonCon 2024. We have a very creative group here, and I am actually going to defer to Celestia Ward, who will be the moderator for this panel, and she is very creative and very talented. So take it away, Celestia. Thank you.
Hi. Well, first things first, I am not Leighann Lord. And unless this is a really clever cue practical joke, I'm not John Delancey. Or am I? And skepticism and creativity is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's one of those dichotomies that seems like it's almost breaking some rules. Skeptics are analytical, and that's the opposite of creativity, or is it? But first, let's introduce our panel here. At the end, we have Michael. Tell us what you do.
I'm a science fiction novelist and game designer, and pretty much I'll do anything people pay me for.
I'm Gail C. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And I'm the co-founder and one of the con runners for Continual, the online ongoing multi-genre convention that never ends. So I write a lot about monsters and monster hunters and magic.
I'm Cady Coleman. I'm a former astronaut and a friend of Jamie Ian Swiss, who lured me here. Actually, he lured me to my first Skeptics conference in New York City, and I've been curious ever since. And I'm not exactly, well, I don't make my living as a creative person, but I do, I love to play music. And it's interesting that we've done a lot of creative things in space.
And I think astronauts should be granted the same provision that the Marines have, where you're never a former Marine, you're always a Marine.
Okay.
You are astronaut.
Okay.
Where's Dexter?
In the bag. Oops.
I'm Ian Harris. I'm a comedian, skeptic comedian, and a filmmaker. And that's it. There you have it.
Okay, well, we spent the last panel, for anybody who was in here, defining skepticism, which took a whole hour. Now, in 30 seconds or so, can I ask each of you to give me, like, your elevator pitch for what you think creativity is? If I was a 5-year-old and you had to explain to me what creativity means, what would you say? And I'm going to start with Ian on this side here.
Oh, geez. If I was talking to a 5-year-old, I mean, to me, it's on the base level, using your imagination to create. Some way you create creativity can't. I can't use create and creativity, can I?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, being very creative. That'll be my trump. Very creative. Using, I don't know. I think just using your imagination to to come up with ideas and art and things that people enjoy on a level that is. Thank you. Brain needs water. I'll keep passing these down.
Creativity is like water.
Gosh, that's it. I'm not good at elevator pitches, apparently. This is why I can't get my film made.
You're the filmmaker, yeah.
Give us your movie. It's about a guy and I don't know. Something happens to him.
Well, the first rule of creativity is sometimes it fails you, right?
Yes, exactly. But I mean, I think honestly that's it. I mean, what is it's something other than gosh, I wish I had known this question ahead of time, because I would have thought about it. But I honestly don't know. I honestly couldn't even tell you what it is, other than using your imagination to create art and do stuff that people can appreciate on a level that's not necessarily academic, I guess.
Well, why don't we let you think about it for 2 more minutes while we have.
As far as I go.
Now, is it Tini or Tini?
It's Tini. It's short for Christine. That's how to
Tini,
remember it.
okay.
It's Tini.
Introduce yourself.
I apologize for being late, but it's DragonCon, so you show up late to your panel with a drink and 2 ribbons. Sorry about that. I'm here, but it's clear I had a good time getting here, right? My name's Tini Howard. I write primarily comic books. I've written for Marvel and DC. If you read Catwoman, Harley Quinn, if you read Excalibur during the X-Men era. But I'm probably here because I wrote a comic that I don't think is currently in print, but there's probably some comic shop that has it in their back issue somewhere, called The Skeptics. So I'm probably here to talk about that. It was a short 4-issue series about some kids who are smart enough to ask the right questions when, during the 1960s, kind of at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Russia begins claiming they have teenagers with psychic powers, basically like they have X-Men. And a bunch of 2 American students and their professor decide that they're going to doubt that. And instead of panicking and launching the bomb, they decide to ask the right questions. And that makes them heroes. And it was very much inspired by my passion for the work of James Randi. So it was cool to put that into a book.
Fantastic.
Huh? Oh, I wrote a Barbie comic once, but like literally that was 10 years ago. Yeah.
Well, let's challenge you right off the bat. Your 30-second elevator pitch of how would you describe what creativity is?
Same thing as skepticism, asking questions.
Good, that's a good answer.
I have like 20 more seconds, all right?
See, Ian, that's how you do it. That's how you do it, Ian.
Okay. I agree.
turn.
I agree. Ditto.
Cady, as a science-minded astronaut, how would you define creativity?
It's what you see or hear or know when you look at a situation or an object or a scene, and it's your perspective. It's not something that has been taught to you. It's just your ideas when you see something or hear something or experience something.
Okay. And how about you, Gail? What's your short definition of creativity?
It's gathering the sparkle and the wonder and putting it in a way that other people can see the same magic.
Ooh. Oh,
She's a poet.
I'm voting.
Writers. All right.
Well,
beat that, Stackpole.
I have to follow that. No, I think creativity is trying to answer those questions that have no answers. It's almost a Zen exercise. The what if question. You look at a situation and you say, this is what is, and then you ask yourself, but what if this was different? Mm-hmm. And you take that spark and you work from that and just keep reducing it down. And I think that same sort of reduction down to how would this work and everything feeds right back into skepticism, because it's someone claims they've got psychic powers. The skeptic is really saying, but what if you don't?
Yeah.
What if this is a trick? How would we do that?
Yeah, that's kind of where the whole book came from. I was like, how come in the 60s when Charles Xavier said he had Jean Grey, no one was like, doubt? Like X for doubt? Like nobody even questioned that? And I was like, well, there's a book in that.
Yeah. Well, a few questioned it, but she melted their brain.
I'm not the biggest Jean fan, so we probably don't want to. We probably don't want to do this. Yeah.
Well, and actually, to me, that's interesting to say. What if? So what happens if this is true? Or how did you put it? What happens?
You look at something and you just say, what if this was different?
Yeah. What if this was different?
Yeah.
And so in the space program, I mean, this is like we make a plan, and then they say, but we go, well, but what if this is different? What if we get there and the spacecraft can't come home? What do we do?
A totally hypothetical example.
And so you call that
Look at
creativity, and we call that survival, and actually the way we live every day. So I think it's interesting. It could be both.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think turned on its side, it also works for the fantastic, because if you start with something that we don't conventionally believe really does exist, then you say, well, what if it did? And what would have to be present for it to be plausible? And how would the world be different if that was indeed true? And then you have the world-building basis for consistency and believability in something that has fantasy elements.
See, this is why I'm amazed that skeptics can do any world building and write stuff. Ian, you were mentioning this earlier where you're really hard on yourself, you said, because when you think about doing something, a film, a writing project, you're like, oh, but that's wrong, and that's wrong, and that's wrong, and how would that be logically? I have to, you have to come up with a solution for all these problems that result from the what ifs.
Yeah, logic really messes up stories a lot. Now, because we've all watched. So I write films. So we've all seen films, and you're like, dude, just put gas in the car and the movie's over. Like, what the fuck? What are you doing? Like, if the guy hadn't done that, and then instead he ran off the cliff, and then a bear attacked him, and then this happened and that happened. Just put gas in the car. You don't need to go, find an oil well. Like, stop. Like,
Run the other way, Prometheus scientists. Run the other way.
It's like every single rom-com could be solved by, just so you know, I'm in the CIA. That's all you need to do. Doesn't have to need to be, you lied to me undercover when your life was depending on it. Now I'm leaving. You don't. And so when I got asked to write a horror film, and it's like it's really hard because I have to, I'm okay sometimes watching. Like I can watch a fantasy type movie. I can watch a Lord of the Rings or some sort of like a Harry Potter type movie and put myself, okay, there's magic in this world. But when I watch a horror film, I just roll my eyes and go, oh, you're afraid of Satan? Jesus, what is wrong with you people? Like, I can't, so when they're like, write a horror film, I'm like, I would just go, well, how about I don't believe in nonsense, and then move on. That wouldn't scare me. You know what I mean? So it's so hard. But you have to solve these problems, and I solve the problems too quickly, and then I have to create a new problem, and it's a new plot point. So I'm always solving my plot points way too early. Because I just see I go, well, that's a stupid plot point. But in every other movie, that would fly. But it won't fly in my movie because I'm like, no, that's a stupid plot point. And it's really hard.
You assume your audience is very intelligent and you don't underestimate them, which is great.
This specific one here?
But I think one of the other things that sometimes as skeptics we tend to ignore because we're looking at the logic is we tend to ignore the emotional reality for a lot of people. A same basic situation, you can have a dozen people and they'll all have different emotional reactions to it. And part of being a writer is looking at that and trying to imagine how the characters are going to react. I remember I was in Moscow in their equivalent of the Air and Space Museum, which is nothing like the Smithsonian, but they had a display case of the space suits that they had made for Russian cosmonauts walking on the moon. And the little English thing said these were for them walking on the moon. And my emotional reaction was just, and yet you never got there.
Yeah.
And that emotional reaction is certainly true to me as an American who watched the space program. But for a Russian who comes in and looks at that, they're going to see, oh, we plan to be there, and they can be perfectly proud with that. And so sometimes in being creative, you have to deal with that emotional reality, which is entirely divorced from the physics and the math and the logic side of things.
Yeah. I was just, unsurprisingly, Mr. Stackpole's a genius. And I think I just want to underline something you said that's like something I wanted to bring up on this panel, but you brought it up first because you're brilliant. It's so easy as skeptical storytellers to forget that when you feel them, emotions feel very real. Even if your logic questions them, we have all jumped when our friend walked in the room too fast, even though we deep down know that's not going to hurt us. And like your character's emotions are a valid form of propelling them. Like, you're God, you're writing the story, like, it's okay to have your character be lost in their thought. The other thing that, like, I guess, as a skeptical storyteller, that can be hard, but, like, much like emotions, skip the track. You go. I'll come back to it. It just like this was like remember me, and I just forgot what I said.
But
I'll get back to it.
I was just gonna say that I think it does help though. And the other, this is also what we were talking about earlier, Celeste, was for me, like I have producers and other writer friends who go, "Hey, could you read this?" And they always say, "Hey, your logic is weird. So could you read this and tell me where all the holes are?" And I will say that when you do, it can be frustrating sometimes if you're always overthinking things. But when you do, and the story still has all the all the emotion, all that sort of stuff, but when it is airtight, it's so much better.
Oh yeah.
And especially like if you're writing something that maybe that has a lot of mystery or something like it that in it, because it's just so much harder to figure out when it's airtight. When you've thought of all of the holes,
Skeptics
it's just so
make
much better.
excellent editors.
So it's true. That reminds you reminded me with your brilliant point of what I was going to say, which was one of the biggest things that doesn't come from logic or emotion or anything that will sell any story and make it watchable, readable, lovable is confidence. Like, if you know what you're doing and you speak confidently and you trust your knowledge, people will believe you. Even if what you write turns out strange, confidence means something. Most of us have probably watched The Room. It's an incredibly watchable movie. It's the worst movie. But Tommy Wiseau is so there for it. He believes in it 100%, and that makes it watchable. Movies that are unwatchable to me are things that nobody believes in, like nobody believed in The Project. It was made by committee. It seems like sludge. But if you're confident, I mean, look, we're skeptics, but not everyone is. You can fake it. You can fake your confidence on the page, even if on the page is the only place you have confidence in your life. Even if you're not a confident person, when you lock into your story, you should have utmost confidence because it's yours and it comes from your soul and it's something. All right, souls aren't real. Souls aren't real. It comes from your experience. It comes from your lived experience, which is unlike anyone else's. You are your own unique blend of chemicals, and you should represent that.
Well, I think a lot of us just now have been talking about how an overactive sense of skepticism sometimes hinders your ability to create, or it can really refine it. I want to know now, what are some ways that your creativity can be harnessed to improve your skepticism? Whether or not it's communicating the skepticism to people, getting a message across, having that message resonate.
May I pitch that it may make us more understanding?
Empathy is a wonderful point.
I don't think there's any reason that skepticism and empathy don't coexist. I consider myself a very emotional person.
You should have been here for the last panel. It was a big point of our last panel.
That's fantastic.
In order to be a good skeptic, you have to have empathy for why people fall for the things that they fall for, because we're all built that way.
Yeah, and even just to accept that, everyone comes from different experiences, and things that might be very factual to you, might not be for someone else from a different perspective, economically, culturally, religiously, gender, race, all of these lines. Like, even just me and someone that came from the house next door to me, who's another, like, white girl, we have completely different experiences. And yeah, like, if even if you believe that all we are is chemicals and meat, that's unique. That's your chemicals in meat. And you should love those chemicals in meat. Love isn't something we can define, but it's very, very real,
Well, let me also, talk about the willing suspension of disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what happens. I'm a fiction writer, okay? I have written 6 or 9 nonfiction books on marketing, but I am a fiction writer. I take you on a vacation. I take you on a journey. I give you a way to get away from the crappy boss and the bills in the mailbox and all the other things that aren't making you real happy right now. And for a chapter or 2 at a time, I take you somewhere else. Better than Calgon, I hope, if you remember those old ads. But there's a willing suspension of disbelief there. If you enter one of my books, you are, without signing, a contract, saying, for the purpose of reading this book and being entertained, I am going to willingly suspend my hypercritical discussion of whether or not magic is real, whether or not ghosts exist, whether or not people can be psychic, because I want to be told a story and entertained. And I think that is a very different thing when you are entertaining someone. It's like when you get on a roller coaster. I would not willingly, jump out a 23-story window. But if I get on a roller coaster at Six Flags and it drops me, I have willingly put myself in that situation for the thrill of feeling like I'm going to die. But I put myself there. I accepted that risk. I accepted entering into that contract. So I think there is a place and a validity to creating, and this comes back to world building, For purposes of entertainment, I'm going to tell you a story. Now, there may be talking animals. Do we really think there are talking animals and singing frogs? No, I don't think so. But come along with me on this journey, and we're going to have a lot of fun. And you're going to forget your troubles for a little bit. And at the end of it, you can go back to dealing with all your problems. But you were entertained by a singing frog. And I think that there is great value in that. And I think that humanity has, for as long as we've been human, sought that respite from the rest of the world. So I think while I use research methodology, and I can talk about that later, and I think all of this other stuff is very, very valuable, there's also a lot of value to just saying, I'm willingly suspending my disbelief to have a little fun.
But also, can I just add to that on both of your points, to me, that's where I've made the decision where when you think about any discussion, you can take somebody who's extremely logical and extremely smart, and if their premise is faulty, they can lead you down. I mean, we've all heard this with political arguments where someone's got this, it sounds like a brilliant, and they've duped all these people into believing something, but if you go back to the beginning and go, oh, well, their statistic that they're basing all this on is false, right? So yeah, it's a brilliant argument, but what they said was BS, so it all falls apart.
That was one of the things when Tini was talking about it, in terms of having empathy for people and realizing people come from different backgrounds and different, different everything.
If that's your base.
You can't let it go to the point where it's like, okay, well, we just have different alternate facts.
Right.
And you, as somebody who's in a situation where having alternate facts can result in an explosion in space. Oh no, things don't explode in space. That's a fake. In catastrophic failure with lives lost. And you've written a book on coalition building among people who are different than you. How do you see skepticism and creativity mingling in terms of having empathy, bringing people over to work together when you really need to? I think you'd know a lot about that.
I think this is the hardest question. It's not fair to ask me the hardest question. I was thinking about this in terms of the alternate facts that I see in movies, and people want to know, well, what do you think? Was that real? And I'm in suspending your disbelief. I'm actually very forgiving in that way. And not just because ended up working some on gravity. I did not work on the technical part, by the way, because it has actually got a lot of holes in it, right? Like big holes, big suspension of belief. But I like it that it's a very human story, and it's about what these. To me, I'd say that because of the graphics that they used, and that they let people see what our view of the Earth looks like, and how it felt to have it. And it's one of the regrets that I have when I get to go and do this is you don't get to bring the people you love with you and people you care about, and very few people get to go and do this thing. And so when a movie actually shows how sort of vast it is and what it feels like to be a single person making your way there, that means a lot to me. And I can forgive. The fire extinguisher thing was riding around on the fire extinguisher. That was very hard to forgive, right? But I don't know, as long as it doesn't get too distracting, and gravity was easy for me to kind of do that.
I think that's the hallmark of a skeptic, by the way, being able to enjoy a movie, but also go, nitpick.
But I think my point is that if you've created a world, for me, I don't mind creating a world as long as the skepticism and the logic plays out within that world. I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
As long as they don't break, like if I'm watching a vampire movie, I don't believe in vampires, but as soon as they break the rules of vampire, I'm like, oh, now you just made up a new rule for a vampire. That's not how that works.
Rules,
you have to
rules are
be
super
within
important,
the rules.
Yeah.
Right?
We've all seen Scream. Like you have to,
Right, yeah.
you have to act within the rules. No, that's a really good point, especially in horror movies. But like in general, like you do set the rules. I think when it comes to world building and stuff.
We got lectured about that. We got lectured
way,
about
that's
that.
That's
other
better.
way, yeah.
Okay, the feedback was just killing me. I think, when you, I got distracted again. This is bad. World building. I think when you're doing that, like, you should also, it's really easy to sit down and be like, I have a cool theory of magic and here's how all this goes. But also like, you have to remember that like people are going to use it, right? So like, what do people, whatever kind of people you're writing, they might not be humans, but like humans are going to read it. So, you know, what aspect of humanity or logic or whatever are you drawing on? Because like, you can't build a magical priesthood if you don't have a way for people to become part of it. You know, like, and if people are born into it, they probably don't all like it. Or does it recruit? Or does God pick it because God is real in your story because it's fiction? You can do whatever you want, is the point. And like, again, that just goes back to confidence. Like, you just have to be confident in your rules. And it's easy to not be. The way I work is typically I may make up the rules as I think of the story person, and I will happily change a rule if it makes the story better. I have a project I've been working on where I was like a couple chapters in and I was just like, God, this is bleak. Like, I like bleak, miserable fantasy. I like a crap sack world. But I was just like, I'm not even, like, why would I expect anyone to have a good time reading this? Because I'm not having a good time writing it. And like, it was a scene where like an infant died. And I was like, what, like, why doesn't the protagonist just save this baby? And I was like, well, that would lighten things up a little, wouldn't it? And so, like, part of it is having that conversation with yourself. If you're not confident, get confident by talking to yourself. Ask yourself those questions. Ask your characters those questions. Sit down with your character in your head and say, hey, dummy, why'd you sign up to be a priest? Why do you believe this? Because I don't. And if you're, like, I'm a role player. I've been playing D&D since I was very young. And I'm a second generation nerd. My dad played D&D. So I've grown up with it my whole life. And like, I don't know anything about my character really until I'm put in a situation or someone starts asking me questions. Because then you find out that what you respond or what feels natural for a character to respond is not always the logical thing. And when you feel like you're making up compelling things, and like let yourself make up a few compelling things that don't make sense because it's fiction. And as Gail was saying, that's the point. It doesn't have to be real.
Well, they still have to make sense.
Yeah, but
I didn't say they don't have to make sense.
No, I'm not saying you said that. I'm saying like allow yourself to make up things that are compelling and then justify them. And if they don't justify, go back and tweak it. You can tweak both ends as long as you want. You're the storyteller.
Well, the whole machinations in forming plot, I think having a skeptical mindset has definitely helped me in situations like that.
Yes.
And I have noticed, to my great surprise, as I started surrounding myself with other creatives, a lot of them were skeptical. Mm-hmm. And that surprised me. And I want to ask the panel here, let's start with you, Michael. You've been quiet over there because we've been doing the talking. But can each of you just kind of tell me, in your specific creative field, your peers that you deal with, are you the only skeptic, or do you find that a lot of people in the higher echelons of what you do are just as skeptical as you are?
I certainly know writers who are skeptical, and I know writers who are not at all. I think that the good thing about being a skeptic, especially when you're doing creative stuff, is that you're looking for the places where it doesn't work. You're looking for the things that you can put together and make it better, because you really want it to scream. I mean, I know if I'm doing a story and I want it to, I want the readers to go through a whole series of emotions, then I'm going to look at this with a very, very critical eye to make sure that everything I've written will take them through that.
Trying to falsify things.
Well, not so much falsify things as much as, stories are have got an emotional component to them as much as they've got a logic and world building component to it. And you want to take them through that ride. Otherwise, I don't really see the purpose. I mean, there are plenty of stories that are written where there is no emotional arc for any of the characters, and they do perfectly well. To me, that's eating Happy Meals every day. Okay, and it's fine every so often. You're stuck on a plane, you're going to read one of those stories, and it will get you through. But I'm looking to do something that's a little bit more. It delivers story on multiple levels, not just the action level or those things. And so being skeptical helps me say, is this story actually going to go ahead and do that? this, I think, applies to skepticism as well in general. We tend to be problem solvers, okay? I mean, that's what we're looking for. We're trying to make it always work. And so whether it's in our own story or whether, an aunt says that your uncle who's got cancer is going to go to this psychic surgeon, you want to solve for the correct answer.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think when we to go back to the points earlier about empathy, you don't just open up on your aunt and say, you're an idiot, what are you giving this guy money for? You realize that this is an emotional reality for them. You know that the person who's sick is terrified. So you want to be there to be able to provide them the correct information and steer them toward that answer so they can find it themselves. Because there's no way, I mean, you can't commit them for this sort of fraud. You could take other steps, I suppose, to get rid of the psychic surgeon. But it's important for us to be able to take a look at human beings, how they react, whether it's in stories or reality, and then apply that, hopefully, for the best so nobody gets hurt.
I think a lot of it comes down to psychology. When you're writing a story, for one thing, there's the psychological journey that you want to take your readers on, which you can argue is a form of manipulation, but they're willingly signing up to have their emotions manipulated for the 200 pages that they are in your grip. So you want to give them a good ride, like that roller coaster. And I draw on myth and folklore and some of the earliest explanations that we have recorded that human beings have used to explain the world around them, because those resonate very deeply. Those have deep emotional roots. And to bring that forward into a modern story, whether I'm creating vampires, whether I'm creating ghost lore, whether I'm looking at how do the mechanics of magic work for the world building of my story so that there is an internal logical consistency, but when you can also be informed by and hearken back to those ancient elements, there's a reason that some of these elements have persisted in communal memory, because we like them, because they speak to us, because they give us an answer when there were no other tools or ways to get answers. And so when I'm writing fiction, and we all know this is fiction, I'm not passing it off as anything else, and you're willing to suspend your belief to read my fiction, tying back into some of those ancient strains speaks to some of that perhaps atavistic nature to say, okay, this is an explanation that doesn't fly today, wouldn't fly outside of the bounds of a fictional story, but within the constraints of this fictional story and this world building, this is internally consistent. So I'm not trying to persuade anybody that anything in my stories, ghosts, monsters, vampires, magic, whatever it is real. I just want to take them on a good ride that doesn't throw them out of the suspension of disbelief during that 250 pages.
And would you say, as a writer who trucks in ghosts and paranormal and all the other things you write about, are you the only skeptic that you know of in that field, or are there plenty?
Oh, there are plenty.
That's good to hear. Okay.
Yeah, there are plenty. We play with this stuff. It doesn't mean we believe it all.
Yeah, we don't use our supply.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cady, I'm going to turn it into a two-parter for you, although, see, I'm giving her all the hard questions. It's what you get when you graduate from NASA. Of course, I'm assuming most astronauts are somewhat skeptically minded. They're not bringing, homeopathy up on the ship, with them. Some. But how many astronauts are actually creative and but tell me if there are. I want to know. And the flip side of that is how many astronauts, play a musical instrument, are singers, are artists. You mentioned wanting to bring that experience down to tell people about in a creative way that they could understand. So how many, I'll let you talk now.
Well, all this discussion has made me think, I'm friends with Jamie, but I've not really delved into skepticism as much as one would like, right? But in listening to all this, I think that, astronauts and engineers and scientists who work at NASA are very likely to be skeptics, and our lives depend on it, really.
Thank goodness.
And that, the sort of alternate facts, this is
Yeah.
not exactly answering your question quite yet, but those alternate facts, and actually real discussions, especially when you think about having to, you want to know how safe something is. You're never going to know exactly, but you want to know as much as we know. And now you're going to ask that question to somebody who built something in a different country, speaks a different language, right? And then there's a commercial company where, they do things in a really different way and have really different conversations and sometimes make decisions and don't even have meetings. Not kidding, right? And so it's very different. And so it actually takes really, I think, it takes a lot of discussion, and I think those discussions happen over coffee and beer and in the gym, where you really look somebody in the eye and say, those valves that you use are like, it's been the same valve for like how many years, 60 years or what? And do you really think that they work better than the modern ones we could build? And when they look at you and say yes, and they talk about it, then I think you evolve to that coalition that you've talked about. But in the meantime, I do think, on the sort of flip side of that, there is a lot of really creative people. We've got, I think the instruments that have been up there, I brought an Irish flute and a tin whistle, and Ian Anderson's flute with me, and plus my own, up there. And there's been another flute player, sax player, Don Pettit, who's about to launch. Last time he was up, he built a didgeridoo from scratch, okay? Saxophone, I think I might have mentioned that.
Didgeridoos.
May I ask
in
a quick
space.
question about the didgeridoo?
Sure.
Is the didgeridoo in the darkness of space the eeriest thing you've ever heard?
I was not there, but I would imagine.
It sounds so eerie. Like that. I have so many questions about space.
Okay. I did wake up one morning to hearing sounds on the roof, like clanging on the roof. And I was like,
Was it reindeer?
well, it was not that time of year, okay?
We do believe in
and, so,
Santa.
and I was like, what is it? And we never have like two crews on board where they're on different time shifts. We just don't do it, except we did it right at the end of my tenure up there. And so the shuttle crew is out there doing a spacewalk when we're still asleep. And I was like, oh, it's those guys. But I was just like, so wrong.
Did you
Noise
get a
on the roof.
broomstick?
So
You're
wrong.
like, shut up.
I wouldn't like hearing a bang from outside if I was in a tube.
I know. But back to the creative kinds of things. Interestingly enough, first of all, in this discussion, we've used the word emotion probably more times than I've heard it in my entire career at NASA, right?
Oh, wow.
It's not. It's not a place that really does that, except when you talk to individual people, and then you find it's definitely there. But the Japanese are the first ones, or were the first ones to bring up art experiments, and it's things like. We're gonna.
Whoa. What is an art experiment?
There's like a, sort of a sculpture that has lights on the end, and we would throw it and toss it and spin it in different ways and film that in the dark so that you could see that. There was a composer that wanted Koichi from Japan to take pictures out the window of the moon, but without touching anything. So then the moon would just be in some spot, and it would be wherever it wanted to be. And then wherever that was in the frame of the picture, he was going to compose music to that. There was dressing up, okay, in kimonos and things. There was doing pottery and making figures. And then some people's favorite was taking an evacuated cylinder, so there's nothing in it and the valve is closed, and taking that out on a spacewalk and opening it up so that you know that what goes inside is going to be whatever space really is. And then that's in a museum. So this is the job, and it actually was really great because it made people think. People loved doing these things on board. It was very fun, and I think it encourages people to play. We've had Nicole Stott is an artist, did painting on board. Alan Bean, when he came back, did painting, of course. So there's, and back to music, we've had the bagpipes. Someone told me more than once. Can you imagine Bagpipes?
I think that's
I didn't even like
In
it
a tin
Scotland.
can.
opposite of the didgeridoo in space. That's like bagpipes. I don't know. They're both a horror movie.
I mean, both could kill you.
yeah.
They do feel like opposites, though,
Yeah.
somehow, like sonically.
No,
Now-
didgeridoo would be cool, actually.
Ian, you've
I have not done stand-up comedy in space.
Ian,
Although I have had-
Well,
have you done
standing up.
anything with bagpipes?
No,
No.
no. But I will say I've done shows where the audience felt like I was in a vacuum.
well.
But
As far as skepticism among other creatives, you live and work in Los Angeles in the film industry. Are most of your friends skeptical or not at all?
no, it's probably people who consider themselves skeptics. Like with stand-up, I always get that people always go, "Oh, well, you're a skeptic comic. Aren't all comics skeptic? Isn't that skeptical? Isn't that the nature of stand-up comedy?" And it's like, kind of on the surface.
I don't know if I'd make that assumption.
Like,
yeah.
because people go, comedy is like trying to look at things in a different way. I mean, especially like 80s, observational. Why do you drive in a parkway and park in a driveway? Whatever. Like, but when you talk to people, you find that it's the same mixed bag as everywhere else. Like there are people that are, for sure. Now look, there are a lot of comedians I know, and a lot of people I think in the entertainment industry that I meet seem to be pretty empathetic and pretty smart. I meet a lot of smart people, and I think that lends itself to asking questions. But sometimes that goes too far. I find a lot of people that go like almost conspiratorial sometimes because they're always just asking questions, right?
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it's funny because with the comedy thing, I feel like it's I try to go. It's difficult for me because like I've been a skeptic my whole life, like called myself a skeptic since I knew what a skeptic was, and I've been doing comedy. It was the only job I ever had, so that's what I've been doing since I was old enough to have a job, and I feel like in the last 13 years, all I've done is comedy skepticism. Like all I do is crowds that come to see me. I don't do comedy clubs anymore. I don't do anything. I don't do cruise ships or anything. I do theaters and I do cons and I do things where people are coming to see me. And that's weird because I get corrected. Like I have to be a better skeptic now than I am a comic. And regular people come and see me and they're like, "Did you need a 37-minute setup for one punchline?" Yes, I did, because somebody would come up and correct the math.
You've chosen the world's hardest audience.
Yeah, and half of and I'm talking from my perspective, not anybody else's. All of us are socially.
Good.
Yes, and so sometimes each show will end with one person close talking physics for why I got the formula wrong or whatever, and that's my audience half the time. So but I like it. I like that. It keeps me honest, and then same thing like saying earlier. So how do I keep that? How do I make that work for regular people? Because I do have regular non-skeptic people who just think, "Oh, this looks like a fun show. This would be cool." And people who knew me from when I was just doing regular comedy, which I did for 20 years, just doing comedy clubs and whatever. So I still get that mix. But yeah, it really keeps me very, very honest. But I find that a lot of comics think they're skeptics, but they don't really know what that means.
Yeah.
And they think, "Oh, I'm asking questions and I'm looking at things a different way," and you're like, not really.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head too when you talked about conspiratorial thinking. When you've amped up your creativity really high and your skepticism really high, and you just go a little too high on both, you get a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, I feel like they're in the right vein. Everybody I know that's all my conspiracy theory friends, they're in the right mindset. Like you always say that, question everything. Well, no, yes, but at some point you have to find an answer. You can't just keep constantly asking questions even when you've already figured, you've done all the math, the peer reviewed, the blah, 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 blah. You still can't go, "Yeah, but do I trust math?" Like, you at some point, whose math is that, man?
Big numbers as their hands in this one.
And it's like at some point you have to go, "No, we can trust this until we have a better answer," and that's okay. But the mindset of "Oh, let's keep looking for the answers" is a great mindset. But you have to know where good research comes from. You have to know where good evidence comes from. You have to know which sources to trust, when to not trust a source. Like that's a whole thing that you have to do and be diligent about, and we all make those mistakes. We're doing a little thing here tomorrow night. Vandy and I are doing a little game show called What's Your Blind Spot. Every one of us has blind spots. So, it's hard.
Yep.
Speaking of which, I have to leave in about 5 minutes because I have a show at 10 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
So if anybody wants, when this is over at 9:30, go to the Hyatt Regency, and myself and Leighann Lord, who were supposed to be on here, we have a show here every year called the Science and Fiction Comedy Club, a comedy show, and it's just us doing stand-up comedy. And this year we have a special guest, Camilla Cleese, my friend, is also going to be on the show. And so if I leave early, I'm not trying to be rude. I just have to go and set up for our other show.
Give them the special tip on how to get there faster than the habit trails.
Yes, if the habit trails are jammed up, just go outside.
Yeah,
I could not get back, and I just took the street, and I was here in 3 minutes.
and what room is your performance
Oh,
in?
it's the Regency. So it's the Regency Ballroom. It's 6 and 7 or whatever it's called.
Okay.
It's right below the main. When you
Is-
go
is-
across the Abbott Trail,
is that the
it's
Hyatt-
one down
Hyatt
at the
or-
Hyatt. Yeah.
okay.
So at 10 o'clock, you should have time to make it if you guys want to go. But I've got 2 more minutes, and then I'm gonna.
I'm going to jump in on the idea of conspiracy theorists because I grew up with a lot of that. And I would contend that it's not the same, that it's not just questioning, and it's not just looking for deeper answers. It's rooted in a profound lack of confidence and lack of knowledge and vulnerability because they don't know who or how to trust, and they don't have the tools to know who to trust and how to trust, and therefore everything is up to be questioned.
Agreed.
It's coming
Agreed.
from a
Yeah.
profound state of vulnerability and fear.
Agreed.
And
Yeah.
so they're not vetting their information.
No.
They're not vetting their sources. They don't know how to vet their sources, and that makes them incredibly vulnerable and easy to manipulate. So it's a very different thing from real skepticism.
Oh, yeah.
They may go, oh, I don't trust anybody. I research everything. The truth is out there. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You go for what hits you emotionally, where you are fragile, where you are damaged, and it's resonating with you on all those things you didn't go see a therapist about.
Right. I'm just saying that the very, very seed of it is they're hearing what skepticism is, and they go, oh, I'm going to quit. The seed of that. But all the rest of it is exactly what you're saying is exactly what I'm saying. They don't know how to do any of that.
Well, and the thing is that they're trying to solve. I mean, with a skeptic, you're trying to solve for a logical situation, but they're saying the emotional answer is correct.
They're solving for
this-
fear.
This feels right.
Right.
Is what you will see or what you will hear a lot with these conspiracies, and it's like, no, conspiracy theories are why teachers tell you to show your work in math class.
Right.
Okay, because it's like, we have to know how you got there. It's not just this number feels right.
Yes.
We need to know that you can actually do the steps to get that number.
Yes.
I'm always scared of people who go, when I love math and I mention geometry and people go, ugh, remember when we had to do proofs? And I'm like, yes, that was my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
You didn't like proofs? And I'm like, oh, I know a lot about you now.
There
You
you
didn't
go.
want to have to show why those angles were congruent because
Well,
you didn't know.
And I think that when we talk about skepticism, we also have to acknowledge the reality for many people that is deeply, deeply rooted fear. That fear may have been installed by parents, it may have been installed by a culture, it may have been installed by a religious institution that has told them that it is a terrible thing to question and that it is a terrible thing not to believe what you are told prima facie, just as it is said to you, and that looking deeper is a terrible thing. And so you're countering all of that programming when you are asking people to be skeptical because they've been punished for being skeptical. They've been punished for asking questions. And so their default is to go with the feelings that were rewarded, which was acceptance and just making the fear shut up. And unless you realize the depth of that in the people who have been programmed for that, I think you're not going to be successful in getting them on board with skepticism because the back of their mind is saying, someone is going to whack me for this.
There's the empathy.
Well-
There's the empathy we're talking about.
Right. I think the other thing.
You gotta go.
I'm going to go. Hopefully I'll see y'all later.
All right. Yep.
Thank you guys.
Big leg.
I'm in for it too. Somebody gonna laugh?
I think you're correct for a lot of the people who especially are buying into institutionalized conspiracies, institutional things like religion and stuff. I think there's another chunk of non-skeptics who just haven't been activated yet. They're the people that'll go out and read the Eric von Daniken books, or they'll read whatever the latest Crystal's book is. And as those things are written, they are fascinating. And the math seems to work out, and you're sitting there going, wow, the world is wonderful, and who knew? And it takes someone else to trigger it and say, yeah, but what's being said here isn't actually true. And you encourage them then to do the math and to see these things. And that is where the empathy comes in.
An excellent point to be made also about a compelling fiction. I read those von Daniken books when I was a kid,
Yep.
and they felt real.
Yeah.
Like, we know now they're garbage, but they felt very real because it's a convincing and compelling narrative that sounds good and you want to buy in. And you can do that in fiction too. And, like we're saying, be open about the fact that it's fiction and we're not trying to convince you that vampires are real.
Yeah, when you get information, and I often say that skepticism is, quality skeptical outreach is disguising informational vegetables as informational dessert. Because you read something like that, and it's like, oh, this is so compelling, and you remember it, and it becomes part of your whole makeup, how you understand things. And so I think creatives in skepticism are some of the most valuable resources we have, because we can repackage skeptical lessons and the scientific method and truths and ways of understanding things in a way that people will remember, in a way that people will resonate with and understand. And we're getting close to about 8 minutes left. Shall we open it up to
Just
I wanted to say one short thing to answer your
Yeah.
question to the panel about having skeptical colleagues. Was the
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Yes, and actually in comics, it's very interesting because
Yeah.
you've got artists who have to learn about illusions and everything.
Yeah, the big thing is that when you work on properties that are not your own and that have a massive amount of fans, I've worked on Rick and Morty, I've worked on the X-Men, and I've worked on all these properties, that the fans are constantly thinking up stories. Like, every one of us that's a fan of something usually has our own ideas for what we could do if we were given the reins. And the thing is, you can't do that. You have to do not the first thing anyone thinks of, not the second, not the third. You have to think of the fourth. You have to think, and a big part of that is sitting around in a room with your editors, your artists, other writers, and pitching all the bad ideas, pitching all the obvious ideas, asking all the questions, and saying, that idea is too obvious, but what's compelling about it? What's the internal logic that makes us like that idea, and how do we apply that to something probably no one outside this room has thought of? That's all I wanted to say, because my colleagues are all question askers, and it's how we do things as professionals that don't feel already tried.
That's a very good point, and I work with the creative director, Alex Raffi. He manages a ton of creatives, and he says what he looks for in a creative is somebody who can pitch their most precious idea that they think is genius, and when it gets shot down, they smile and come up with another one.
100%.
Yeah,
Be agile.
yeah, agility, absolutely.
Yeah.
And with that, does anybody have any questions they would like to ask the panel? There's a microphone right there in the middle, and you just have to walk up to the
Right behind you.
microphone, right behind you. And the microphone is magic. Trust me on that. You don't have to test it. Don't touch the microphone. It will raise to your height. Oh, look, what? There you go.
Well, I'm not very tall, so it helps.
What's that?
I'm not very tall, so it helps. So yeah, that helps.
I'm not judging you. The microphone is.
Yeah, so I guess my question would just be for anyone here. You don't all have to answer to save some time, but can you give an example of some creative work in either your medium or another one that you appreciated, where you really appreciated the skepticism of the writers, or other creatives involved, or it helped maybe you think things better, or people, an audience where it helped them come around? I've got a few myself, but I'd like to hear perspective.
I'll just shoot out real quick here. Richard Wiseman did a series of comic books called Hocus Pocus. Chef's kiss. Anybody else?
In comics, I'm lucky enough to be friends with and work with one of my favorite writers, who's a guy named Jonathan Hickman. And if you haven't read any of his stuff and you're a skeptical, science-minded person, but you want to read you want to read X-Men that feels like science fiction, or you want to read his stuff, or Fantastic Four that feels like science fiction but has like a good like internal logic to it and feels smart. He's one of my favorite writers for that, and he's someone I love working with. And he encourages me to make stories that feel more solid, both in the logic sense and in the confidence sense. Yeah, if you like X-Men, he wrote a book called House of X. It's like fantastic, and you can just pick it up and read it. You don't have to know what's going on. It's really good. I recommend it, and his work in general. Do you do anything?
No.
I was just going to say, even though he is in fact a practicing Mormon, a lot of Brandon Sanderson's books do show characters with a good amount of skepticism expressed in a way that I found sincere, not like just the believer trying to tear down the skeptic, but asked in a thoughtful way. So
That's
credit you
that's an
in doing
interesting
that.
point, that a creative person doesn't necessarily have to be a skeptic to write a character that is a good skeptic. I've seen plenty of Hermione quotes that have been weaponized against Hermione's creator in a very clever way. So,
Just in general, I think as far as genres go, murder mysteries are wonderful for skeptics and creative problem solving.
Thank you.
hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going even shorter. I love the discussion, love the panel, just because I'm a teacher and I teach elementary, but it's still teaching children to question. I'm also a cult survivor, and I'm also somebody who is a very skeptical pagan. So like, I got a fun mix going on. But I was gonna say that, like, one, with math, it's not the opposite of creativity. There are wonderful creative ways to solve so many things. And then two, I really appreciate the empathy shown with, understanding that you do have to start from where someone is, and if you're trying to deprogram them, you have to understand where they've been, where they come from, and yes to the therapy for everybody. So my question being, it's not common to think of math as creative. It's not common to think of, like with NASA, like with space, you're solving problems constantly, and not everybody can do that. And I think that kind of brings that to light. I'm sorry. But I was going to ask, in your life, what has made you empathetic to be able to solve a problem with someone that may not be like you?
Being a human being.
Yeah.
Listen more, talk less.
Yep.
Well, and I do want to point out that there's the whole field of theoretical mathematics. So to say that math is not creative when you're going out there and you're solving theoretical math, that's pretty darn creative and non-tangible. So I think, math gets a bad rap for not being creative, but there's a lot of creativity out there in math.
I think there's a...
I just want to say two super quick things that aren't your question answer, but I think you'll appreciate them.
Okay.
One, I don't think you have to believe in old gods to follow the old ways.
Right.
I also consider myself a skeptical pagan, and it's because the entire time humanity has been around, we believe in the cycles of the earth. That's unquestionable. That's science. I honor that. I choose to honor the cycles of the earth. That doesn't mean I believe in things that aren't real.
I'll dance naked around any fire you got.
Hell yeah. That's what we're meant to do. We are not meant to have jobs. We are meant to do that. Second thing, podcast called Was I in a Cult? People share their personal experiences, and it's very cool, and I think you might enjoy it and find something healing in it.
I'm not
Thank-
sure if I'm at quite therapeutically.
Hi, my name is Harrison. I've got a really common sort of writing trope / problem that I'd love to see you guys try to take a track at.
Ooh, workshopping.
So you're watching a horror movie, and it's about like ghosts or like mummies or some supernatural thing. And I feel like in almost every one of these movies, there is always this stick in the mud, like take on a skeptic character who, no matter how much it is clear that things are not normal, they're like, what? There's no such thing as ghosts. And then the movie A makes you kind of hate the skeptic for not being on the same page, and B punishes the skeptic for not, for somehow punishes the skeptic for not understanding that they're in a horror movie. How would you go about resolving this issue and making like a skeptic character that works in the context of like a monster movie where there's not exact science?
You
they
had
can
to ask
trace
this
back?
after Ian Harris left.
I know.
There's skepticism, and then there's the lack of critical thinking. If strange things are happening around you, you may not be able to immediately explain what's going on, but you need to acknowledge that strange and possibly dangerous things are happening and react to them in a meaningful way so that you aren't the dead guy in the first act of the movie, where everybody goes, oh, if only he'd been more open-minded, and run.
Yeah.
So, I don't think skepticism is standing around while all this dangerous stuff is happening going, this can't possibly be happening because I am skeptical and this isn't logical. That isn't skepticism. That's just being so stuck in your own thoughts that you can't entertain new information. Run first, figure it out later.
Good answer. And that's it. We're out of time. Thank you for coming, wonderful panelists.
Oh, and I've got books with me.
Oh, and Cady has plugs.
Shameless plug. I have books and happy to sign them if folks want
Yes,
them.
we have a table outside, correct, Angie? There. After here, you can go meet Cady and get her to sign a book for you at the Skeptics table right outside.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Oh, the shameless
Angie,
plug.
what are the
Dun, dun,
directions
dun.
to the Skeptics table? How can you tell them to get there?
Past the elevators?
Somebody wanted.
Is it past the elevator?
Near the escalators.
It's near the escalators.